you so that everyone can see who's talking to you today. I know I've met most of you at some point, but I just wanted to start my webcam and say hello to everyone. So hi, I'm Bethany Lazanik. I am a distance learning associate for the Distance Learning Project. And today we're going to be talking about facilitating engaging webinars. And I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks for making your webinars a little more engaging. So welcome, and thanks for spending your lunchtime hour with us today. Okay, so during today's webinar, these are our objectives. And so I hope that by the end of the webinar today, you would be able to distinguish between asynchronous and synchronous instruction, be able to plan and facilitate an engaging webinar, and then share ideas for simulating the face-to-face classroom experience in an online classroom, understand the benefits of incorporating games into your webinars, and identify at least one new resource or activity that you can incorporate into your webinars right away. And then we'll hopefully have some time for a Q&A session at the end. But if you have questions as we go, you can unmute your microphone and ask questions. This can be an interactive presentation. And if you're more comfortable, it's okay to type questions in the chat as well. Okay, so I want to start out by getting a feel for how many of you know the difference between asynchronous or synchronous instruction. And I put up a poll, and there's a question: is a live webinar considered asynchronous or synchronous instruction? So I'll give you a minute just to answer that. Majority of you have had a chance to vote. I'm still getting a couple coming in, and it looks like the majority of you have the right answer, which is live webinars. When they're live, they are synchronous instruction. Now, if you're recording the webinar and then sending the information out to a student, then it could be considered asynchronous instruction. So very good. Most of you know the differences. And we won't spend a lot of time on this, as the point of the webinar today is talking about making your webinars more engaging. So these are the main differences between asynchronous and synchronous instruction. Asynchronous instruction, just to be clear, can be accessed by students at any time or place, as long as they have an internet connection. And some examples of asynchronous instruction are Khan Academy, USA Learns, Edmentum. It's any program where a teacher can assign work and then students can do it at their convenience. And on the other hand, synchronous instruction is live, where students and teachers are meeting in an online space like we are today. So, done right, synchronous instruction can be a great way to engage distance students. Engaging webinars will help increase student motivation, participation, and learning. An effective synchronous instruction will also reinforce difficult concepts taught in class asynchronously. Taught in class or asynchronously. And this will also help with attendance if you're reinforcing difficult concepts. It can also accommodate learners with different learning styles and communication preferences. In fact, sometimes teachers can get students to participate who normally don't in a traditional classroom. And we'll talk about some strategies for doing that as we go through the presentation today. And engaging webinars will also create a greater sense of connection for students. So when they're well done, they should help students build relationships between themselves, and it will also help strengthen the student-teacher relationships. And this happens when students get to share ideas, have opportunities for critical thinking, and when they receive helpful feedback, not only from their teachers, but from their peers as well. And finally, during webinars, most students can work in their own space with their own devices. And this is an advantage because when you're comfortable, most of us will ultimately learn better. So students and teachers first need to be familiar with the meeting tools to make these sessions engaging. Teachers should practice in student view with a second device. It's very helpful to see things from the student's perspective because the student and facilitator views can be different. So going through this process makes it much easier if the students have a technical issue or have some problem that comes up during your webinars. And this is a practice I don't just preach. This is something that I do when I'm doing anything new. And so for example, before the webinar today, I actually logged on with a second device to test all of these engaging activities that we'll do today because although I use Zoom regularly, I'm using somebody else's Zoom room today. And, there's so many settings and so many things that, just need to go right. So I wanted to make sure that I tested this with a second device where I was logged in as a student and could see what everyone would be seeing as I was talking with you today. And one way to get students familiar with the meeting tools is to make a short video that shows them how to use the various tools and ask them to watch it before their first live online class. Teachers can also give students some time to practice using tools at the beginning of the first class or anytime you're introducing something new that they haven't used before. It's really important to set aside some time to explain the tools to students. That way you can get them to participate. And, teachers can even incorporate the new tools into maybe a fun icebreaker activity, or at least give the students a few minutes at the beginning of class to practice using them. That way, hopefully, they'll participate and learn. And once students are comfortable using the various webinar tools, they can still become confused about what to do and when. So it's really important as the teacher to be clear on which tool should be used to communicate and when, anytime a new discussion starts. So that way the students know how to respond. And I'll tell you, a lot of times in my webinars, just to increase student participation, I'll leave maybe more than one option to respond. So for example, I might say, kind of like I did at the beginning of this meeting, if you want to interact, feel free to unmute yourselves and talk if you're comfortable responding that way. But if you're not, it's okay to type in the chat as well. And a lot of times that'll get more students participating. Something else that's important is to set your webinar schedule well in advance. That way students can arrange their schedules to make sure they can come. You might want to determine student schedules while you're in the classroom, and it's important to advertise your webinar schedule. You want to send reminders maybe through emails or course announcements and or newsletters. You know your students, so pick what works best for them, but definitely remind them. And it's also important to set and enforce classroom rules, to share expectations for behavior and social interaction during class. Effective classroom ground rules where open communication is the norm and the group has the opportunity to interact and collaborate is key. And I have an example here of something that I might display before my class. And this might change depending on what we're doing in class. Some of the bullet points might stay the same, but some of them might change. And another example was the slide. If you were here, you might have saw I had a slide up with the technical requirements and how to mute your microphone and share your webcam and things like that if you want. And so that's another example of a welcome slide that you might use, or at least some of the things that you might put on your classroom rules example. So, just instead of saying keep your mic muted unless you're speaking, if you know you're going to have students in your room that are new, are not sure how to do that, giving them some instructions on how to mute their microphone might be helpful. Okay. So designing an interactive online learning environment is really important for creating positive learning experiences. One way to facilitate this is to consider students' previous experiences with distance learning. Students come to our webinars with many different learning experiences, and often some of the students need time to find their new identity as an online learner, whereas others might have some practice with these types of platforms. So it's just important to remember that. It's important to remember it might be some students' first time and others might be experienced, and you might have to be a little more patient with those students. And pre-planning is super crucial to ensure your webinars are engaging. The success of a live session depends highly on a teacher's amount of preparation prior to the actual session and on his or her ability to connect the session to items of relevance to students' learning. Something to think about is that at first, lesson planning for synchronous instruction might take a little bit longer than it does for the traditional classroom, but that should even out once teachers are familiar with the technology and its capabilities. I know when I first started teaching webinars, I would practice a lot, sort of like I did, way back when I was a student teacher. And it was really helpful to do that. And also to fulfill its capability for delivering effective instruction, a specific lesson plan really is necessary. And the session needs to be focused on topics directly related to course objectives. So it's super important. Students really need to feel that devoting that hour of their time is really highly relevant to them as an individual. And it's important that what students are doing in the classroom or asynchronously are aligned with activities in the synchronous online classes. Attendance is usually highest in webinars that reinforce difficult concepts covered in the classroom or asynchronously. For example, the distance learning project students we find tend to struggle with the extended response for the GED and the HiSET, no matter what we assign to them. So we do offer 2 weekly webinars. So twice per week, we're offering webinars, and we do it twice per week. So we can offer one during the day and one in the evening to help students build their skills and confidence with essay writing. And those webinars are well attended because it really is a topic that students just need some extra help with. And of course, it's always important to know your audience. Most of you have met the students attending your online classes, and the more you know about your students, the easier it's going to be to contextualize your instruction. If you don't know your students in the online class, you can take some time to talk with them one-on-one and get to know them better, or even incorporate some getting to know you type icebreaker activities into the beginning of your sessions. And next, it's important to be respectful of your student's schedule. So you always want to do your best to start and end on time. And You always should greet students as they're entering your virtual class, just like you would in a traditional one. It'll help them feel more welcomed and hopefully more comfortable and, prone to participating then. So a few more tips for facilitating engaging webinars here. Another way to do that is to make sure you're only using visuals that enhance learning. So, very similar to your traditional classroom strategy, for effective synchronous instruction, you want to use just visual inputs that enhance learning, like interactive PowerPoints and video clips and websites, and you want to mix it up too. And when using PowerPoints, it's important to follow the same rules you would in a traditional class. And for example, slides should have, only a few words and utilize effective graphics. It's also important for teachers to supplement visuals with discussions every few minutes to keep the students on their toes and engaged. And it's always important to ask students open-ended questions to gauge their understanding. And I know you know that from being in the classroom, although this is probably even more important in a webinar because teachers can't usually see students' facial expressions and reactions. So by asking those open-ended questions, you can get a better understanding if students are understanding what you're trying to teach them. And during webinars, try your best to be even more mindful of your tone of voice. So, it's always important to be aware of your tone of voice, but probably, again, even more so in an online classroom because students can't see your facial expressions unless you keep the webcam on. And so your tone of voice might be their only point of reference. And we all know, students know when a teacher is excited about a topic or if you're just going through the motions. So make sure you always inflect your voice and show excitement. These things will help engage your learners. I have always myself found it helpful to play back my webinar recordings to do some self-assessment. And I know some of you are probably sitting there cringing at that right now, and I know it can be painful for some of us, including myself. I hate to watch myself and listen to myself on those recordings, but watching and listening to yourself, it really gives you, a good perspective on things that you can do to make improvements to help your students. And try your best to utilize wait time, the same as you would in the classroom. So a little bit of silence might seem awkward, especially in a virtual classroom, but it's really okay. Ideally, the silence is giving students time to process and learn. So just remember, it's okay if there's a little bit of silence. And to keep students coming back to class, keep them wanting to know more. And one way to do this is to link the end of whatever session you're in to the next one and make sure to let them know about that link. So let them know that when they come back next week, what they're going to learn is going to be connected to what you just talked about. And last but not least, teachers should try to find ways to transform successful face-to-face classroom activities online. So here's some ideas for doing just that. And it is possible to replicate most face-to-face classroom activities and strategies in a webinar. Something to keep in mind, though, is that students are likely to need more guidance to complete activities in an online classroom as compared to a traditional class, especially at first, okay? So first, in a traditional classroom, students and teachers can obviously see each other. And if students in a virtual classroom are not able to see the instructor or their classmates, for some, the interaction can lack response, contributing to a feeling of psychological distance. And one way to reduce that feeling of distance is to use webcams. I like to use my webcam during my class usually just at the beginning for a short period of time. And many students in my class do like to use their webcams, but it's definitely not a requirement. We allow them to do it if they want, but it's not a requirement. And we make sure we're clear about that. And you've probably seen some of the recent research from the K through 12 realm suggesting that students should not be required to use webcams. And so, you have to make that decision for yourself, but if they aren't required, you might want to make that clear even before your first session, because that might intimidate a student. If they think they need to be on a webcam, it might keep them from coming to class. So you might want to just let them know that, webcams aren't necessary or are at least completely optional. Also keep in mind, if students are using webcams, they require a lot of bandwidth. So participants with slower connections might have some tech issues if they're required to use one. So you want them to understand that. So if students are using webcams in your class, make sure they know that if they stop the camera streaming, it might just clear up any technical issues that they're having. And it's a good first step to trying to troubleshoot any technical issues. All right, next, to replicate classroom discussions, teachers and students can use their computer audio or their phones to listen and speak during an online class. And teachers need to make sure that students understand how to mute and unmute themselves if you want them to be able to talk and interact. And, encourage students to stay muted unless they're speaking. I know I often have to remind students or hit the mute all button during mine. But yeah, you don't want that background noise. That's very distracting to any, to your students. And chats are a good way to get everyone to participate. And, I mentioned before, even some of those students who don't usually like to speak during a class, whether it's online or in a traditional classroom, you can get them to participate if you allow them to chat. And so teachers can utilize the chat, some ideas, just maybe to do some brainstorming or some short writing assignments, or to practice maybe spelling. Using the chat function. So those are some ideas for using the chat. I'm sure, all of you have probably used the chat for some great things during your webinars. And I'll encourage you now, if you have any ideas for using the chat to make your webinars more engaging, certainly share them with the group. And you can use the chat to do that. Okay. So next, teachers can utilize the file share option in most popular webinar programs or platforms to share things like handouts, worksheets, or really any important document with students. And so with Zoom, the file share button is actually located in the chat. And so I'm going to actually just share with you the file for this presentation to show you what that looks like. You can also go get this off the PA Adult Ed Resources website. But I shared the file with everyone, so it should be in the chat if you just want to grab it from there. So again, this is just a great way to share important documents with your students.
Bethany?
Yes.
We have a comment in the chat box. Jennifer Latsko says she puts discussion questions into the chat so students can see them when they are in breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks, Maribel. Okay. Next, in synchronous sessions, teachers can read the students' understanding by asking them to do a couple different things. So most webinar platforms have something called reaction buttons. Zoom certainly does. I noticed with Zoom, they're all positive reactions, which, I can understand their reasoning for doing that. And then some programs also have emoticons, so you can use the smiley face or maybe a frowny face to ask students to let you know, are they understanding the content you are understanding? And another idea is to set up polls for students to complete. And, you know, the polling questions, I would advise you to set those up before class, so you have them ready to go. But it is something you can do on the fly as well, if that makes sense in your class. And they can be a great opportunity to gauge, you know, what information your audience is interested in, their level of expertise, and, you know, their current understanding or opinions on a particular topic. And if your webinar platform doesn't have the polling function, there are other options out there. And one of them is called Slido. I've come across Slido, and I can type that in the chat if anyone's interested, so you have the spelling of that. But it is a polling platform for meetings and events, and it's free, and it allows you to poll up to 100 participants up to 3 times during a webinar. And so I promised I would put that in the chat, so let me do that just in case you're interested. I believe currently the free version of Zoom does not have the polling function unless they put that in their latest update. So, you know, if you're using the free version of Zoom, Slido might be a good option if you want to incorporate polling into your webinars. And I have noticed students, they really respond well to the polls. In my webinars, almost all students, you know, they always like to answer questions with the polls. And so I've got another poll here for you to gauge your understanding so far. Have you learned at least one strategy today for making your webinars more engaging? And if you haven't, it's okay to say so. We're going to be talking about some more strategies. I know a lot of you are already doing this, so. Give everybody just another few seconds to answer the poll. So I'll share those results with you, and it looks like, you know, good. It looks like most of you have at least one idea so far to make your webinars more engaging. And for those of you who haven't heard any new ideas yet, I will certainly, I hope as we move forward here, you will come up with at least one idea for making your webinars more engaging. Great. Thanks for taking the time to answer the poll. Okay, so screen sharing is another great way to teach new skills by displaying PowerPoints, documents you might have prepared in advance, websites, or even instructional videos. And you can also have students display their work if they are willing to share their screen. And also, I use the screen sharing function a lot with my distance students to help them troubleshoot issues. So again, I have them share their screen, they show me what's going on, and I help talk them through it. And it can be really helpful as opposed to me showing them, because, you know, they get to go through the process themselves and will probably remember how to do it the next time. And breakout rooms, I know Jennifer mentioned breakout rooms. They're a great way to have attendees discuss topics in groups or share different content to specific attendees for a short period of time during class. And most popular webinar software do have breakout rooms now. So you can replicate all of those small group activities that you would be doing in a classroom. And using Zoom, as I know many of you are, teachers can actually assign attendees to breakout rooms in real time. So you can do it as kind of an impromptu thing, or you can pre-assign them before class begins. And again, most of the popular webinar platforms have a whiteboard option that can be used just like a whiteboard in a traditional classroom. And teachers can write or demonstrate concepts on the whiteboard, and students can do the same. And so I'll show you an example of something you might do with a whiteboard. So typically, if I want students to annotate a document, and I know that going into it, I'll have the document prepared, and the annotation tools that you're seeing now are actually available when you're doing screen share. So you can have students annotate a document. But I think a good time to use the whiteboard is when maybe students need some extra practice. So, students are struggling with something, you want to show them another example. And so you might come in here and, maybe you're teaching the area of a square. So you can draw a square in here and you can, maybe give them some of the dimensions and maybe even, write the formula on here. So I'm not super good. I don't have the stylus pen or anything. That's, if you have a pen and a touch screen, that can be very helpful. But actually, with Zoom, they have a text options. You don't have to draw a lot on your own, I have found. I tend to, if I want to type something, I use the text option. And then they have a ton of different drawing tools where you can draw circles or squares or straight lines if you want to make a triangle or something like that. So you don't actually have to do a lot of writing. So again, I think, using the whiteboard is a great way to show students concepts if they need some extra practice with something. And if any of you are using the whiteboard for in other ways during your online classrooms, again, if you want to share that in the chat, that would be great. Okay. Okay, so I've already mentioned that, students can use the annotation tool on a document that's prepared already. And this, what you're seeing here, it's obviously a map of Pennsylvania with all the counties, and this is an icebreaker activity that I have used with some of my students. And so what I would do here, and I'm going to encourage you all to do the same, is use the annotation tool to tell me where you are in the state of Pennsylvania. And so you're going to do this you're going to click on View Options on your screen to see View Options and select Annotate. And then your list of tools is going to pop up on the screen, and you can use the drawing tool, or there's a stamp tool that you can use. I'm going to show you where I am. I'm right here at the bottom of Indiana County. Oh, I like that. Somebody used the stamper tool. Good. And just so you all know, this was, one of the things that, was really helpful for me when I was practicing on a second device in Student View, because the way the facilitator in Zoom accesses their annotation tools is different than how participants do it. So just, a good example of how practicing on a second device as a student can really be helpful. All right, so it looks like we're all over the state. Lots of us on the east side, though.
Bethany, we have a few comments in the chat box. Alexandra says that she has, or she's accessed a free Jeopardy creator, and her students love playing against each other. I separated them into 2 teams, and they enjoyed the challenge. No additional devices necessary, since they are all using my shared screen. Chrissy Klinger says she has pre-made foundation skills framework and workforce Jeopardy templates, and if anyone wants to use them, to contact her. And another one is Kahoot, is also a fun one. Similar concept, but it's individual students competing with each other.
All right. Very cool. Well, thanks for all those comments. And actually, everyone's just a little bit ahead of me because we are going to talk a little bit about games, and Jeopardy's on the list, and so is Kahoot. And if we have time, and I hope we do, I'm going to do a demonstration of Kahoot with everyone, have a little fun on Friday, and show everyone who maybe hasn't seen that yet how it works. So yeah, those are all great ideas. Thanks so much for sharing.